My name is Christina Lynn. My business is Lynn Financial. I love to talk about money because I believe financial savviness is a skill that you can master. What I want to talk to you today about is the superpowers that the state I live in, South Dakota, has in the estate planning industry. Now, you might be thinking that estate planning is not for you because you're not rich or famous, but believe it or not, those are not criteria that you should be placing on yourself when it comes to estate planning. You need basic estate planning no matter how old you are, if you have kids or no kids, if you have pets or no pets, if you have money or no money at all. You need to have basic estate planning done because that is what is best for you and for your loved ones. Estate planning doesn't need to cost you any money. It does require some time and paperwork processing, but you can definitely handle that. If you have a little bit more of a complex financial situation or family situation, or you own a business, any sort of complexity going on in your life, you should invest a little bit more time and money into proper estate planning because you don't want to leave a mess behind for your loved ones. I'm sure that you've heard of horror stories either in your own circle or celebrities that leave behind a huge mess. It doesn't matter the amount of money that you're dealing with. You can leave a huge mess to your loved ones, but that's very easily prevented if you put a little bit of effort and time into this estate planning. And I have to tell you, South Dakota trumps, I think, every other state when it comes to estate planning. They have some real benefits that may be of interest to you. Now, don't think that this isn't relevant to you because you don't live in South Dakota. Not many people do. We have under 1 million people in our state, but that doesn't mean that you can't take advantage of the trust laws in our state. They actually are open to you. So these 4 tips that I got are actually from an attorney here in town. Her name is Lindsay Harris. And I will post a link to the original article that she wrote on this in the notes below. So South Dakota's #1 superpower in the estate planning industry is its very unique tax structure. South Dakota doesn't tax you on personal income, on capital gains, on dividend, on interest, or on inheritance. Now, don't get this confused with not owing any tax at all. We do here in South Dakota pay tax, but it's on a federal level. So you're always going to be subject to the federal laws, but individual states place their own state tax sometimes on top of the federal tax. So, for example, even if you are not subject to the estate tax on the federal level, your state may have a lower exemption level for estate tax, and you may end up having to pay state estate tax. That's where South Dakota can come to the rescue, is if you are in a state that has a state tax for one of those things, South Dakota can shelter you by giving you access to the more favorable trust laws. So if you do live in a state that assesses a state income tax or state tax on interest, capital gains, inheritance, you can adopt South Dakota as your trust state in order to escape that extra state tax. And the #2 superpower for South Dakota is that you can live anywhere in the United States and still set up a trust here in South Dakota. You don't need to be a resident of South Dakota in order to be eligible for one of these trusts. I have a friend who owns a restaurant at the airport, and he's telling me how he often has to deliver these gourmet lunch boxes out to private jets waiting on the tarmac at the airport. And he asked them, what they're doing there, and they're flying in from out of state to go meet with an estate planning attorney or trust company, and then they're flying back up, wheels up, in a matter of hours. These people are coming in, they're not living here in South Dakota, but they're taking advantage of our special trust laws, which you can do as well, even if you're not going to fly in on a private jet. Now, note that there are 6 other states in the United States that also do not have income tax. Those are Alaska, Florida, Nevada, Texas, Washington, and Wyoming. Those are all great spots. However, those states may not have this second superpower, which is you don't need to be a resident in order to be eligible to set up a South Dakota trust. So you can check into those other 7 states. However, I think that South Dakota is pretty unique in that it combines both the superpower 1 and the superpower 2. The number 3 superpower that South Dakota gives you in terms of estate planning is the extra protection it provides you. Lindsay Harris, that I mentioned before, points out in her article that South Dakota has a couple of different types of laws that work together that provide a pretty strong protection around your estate. I'm going to read a quote from her blog here because it is a bit of legal jargon. One of the key differences in South Dakota compared to less favorable trust states is that South Dakota states a discretionary interest in a third-party trust, a limited power of appointment, and remainder interests in trust assets are not considered property interests. This discretion, along with a potent sole remedy charging order law, provide a powerful shield. All right, let's go back to speaking in layman's terms now. So what that means is South Dakota has some laws in place that provide some pretty fierce protection against creditors, against nursing homes, against divorce happening to your kids and their spouses from lawsuits and things of that nature. So the Medicaid spend down can get pretty complicated, but I'm sure you've heard your parents, grandparents talk about protecting their money from spending it all on nursing home costs, because we know that nursing home costs are very expensive. A lot of times estate planners can get creative with trying to protect your assets from that Medicaid spend down. And South Dakota has some of the more favorable laws to protect the assets in a trust like that. And divorce is another issue that I mentioned. So if you have children and you want to leave an inheritance to them, you don't necessarily want to have your money going to an ex-spouse of your child. However, that unless you have your estate planning pretty ironclad, set up properly in a trust, that can happen. And South Dakota has some of the more favorable laws in place for trusts in that manner. And the same for lawsuits or creditors. If, let's say, you pass away and a creditor comes after your spouse that's still alive or your children, the assets that you leave in the trust can be really well protected in one of our special trusts that we can offer here in South Dakota because of the favorable laws that we have in place. And the number 4 superpower that South Dakota boasts of is that they are one of the few states that offer dynasty trusts. Most trusts have to be set up in a certain way that they end up expiring, whereas if it's important to you that this trust remains forever or for a certain amount of time, longer than normal, dynasty trusts can be of great value to you. A lot of times dynasty trusts are used for individuals with very large net worth, so that might not be the case for you and I right now, but you never know in the future. So there you have it. Those are the 4 superpowers that South Dakota has in the estate planning world. Don't forget, estate planning is for you. You may not have to visit South Dakota or arrange a meeting with an attorney here in South Dakota to take advantage of these laws here in our state. However, no matter where you are, you should be doing some basic estate planning. But I wish you the absolute best. Get your estate planning done and keep your chin up because you are an overcomer.